Are you an ambitious leader ready to break through limiting beliefs, align with your purpose, and thrive in your career without sacrificing your well-being or postponing your true desires? I'm Diana Ordonez, certified high-performance coach and your host. Each week, we'll dive into actionable insights and research-based strategies to help you unlock clarity, build unshakable confidence, and take courageous action toward a life of impact and fulfillment. If you're ready to overcome fear, embrace growth, and step boldly into your next level, you're in the right place. Let's create a life filled with courage and purpose together. Welcome back, everybody. I am here with Jonathan Portillo. He is a pastor and the host of the To Be Men podcast. And today I'm excited to discuss with Jonathan what our purpose is. How do we know we have a purpose or we're pursuing the purpose that is meant for us? How do we go about pursuing that purpose, why it's important, and just all things that relate to having that compass that guides us, our vision and our passion. And I love your podcast. I love what you're doing there. And maybe that's a great place for us to start. Like, why the To Be Men podcast? What is it? How you got called to it? What your mission is there?
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having me here on Life on Purpose. I love that we're talking about purpose on life on purpose, right? It's such a big deal that I don't think many of us sometimes take into consideration or even think about in our day to day. It can be easy to be like, well, purpose is this big grandiose thing for big grandiose people, but I'm just a normal person. So what do I need to worry about purpose? And so I'm excited to dive into it. I think we can learn a lot from each other. We can share a lot with both of our listeners and hopefully impact somebody to go and not just seek their purpose, but pursue and achieve that purpose. But yeah, let's talk about To Be Men for a little bit. Man, we could spend the whole episode talking about that and where that birthed from and kind of the passion behind that. I'll give you the condensed version because I like to talk, and so I could be talking for an hour and a half on just this. But long story short, To Be Men birthed from a desire and even a lack in my own life for strong male leadership. You know, I was raised in a dual parent home, right? My dad and my mom were married for all of my upbringing, but my dad worked an over the road driving job. And so I would see my dad every other weekend, right? So 2 weeks, it was just my mom and me, and then obviously my siblings as they came into the world. But 2 weeks, it was just us, you know, kind of a single mom thing. And then my dad would show up for the weekend. He'd be with us Friday, Saturday, Sunday, go back to work. We wouldn't see him for 2 weeks. And while, you know, physically we had everything we needed, right? My dad made sure we had a roof over our head. We had food in our bellies. We had clothes on our back. And I'm super grateful for everything he did there. What I was lacking and what I learned, you know, years down the road was what I needed was that presence of a strong male role model in my life. And so I went through life kind of searching for that and unfortunately finding it in some of the not great places. But when I graduated high school, I knew I was like, something's missing. I didn't have the words for it or really the thoughts, but I knew I was missing something. And I wasn't going to go to college because I wasn't really a bright kid. I didn't really want to get a job because honestly, I was kind of a lazy kid. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to join the army. I can't be lazy there. I don't have to go to college. They'll tell me what to do. They'll feed me. They'll clothe me. They'll put me in a place to live. And they'll just, do this. And I'm like, cool, I can do that. And so that's what I did. I got out of high school. I joined the army and I served for 6 years there and met some great guys, great role models. And that kind of defined a little bit of what's a man look like to me at that point, kind of masculinity. Again, not completely, right? Now when I was lacking presence, now I was kind of drinking fire from a fire hydrant, right? I'm like, okay, being a man is being strong and tough and harsh and aggressive and all of these great, you know, things that we can and should use for the benefit of ourselves and others, but in a way that wasn't truly healthy. And so learned that for about 6 years, got out when I got married. Because as if anybody's, you know, been in the military, you know, if the army wanted you to have a wife, they would issue you one. And so a lot of the guys, you know, were on their second or third wife. And I didn't want that. You know, I didn't want to have 3 baby mamas and 4 divorces and all of that stuff. And I was like, I just, you know, I want this to work. And so I decided to get out, and I was, again, lacking purpose, lacking direction. I didn't know what was next. I didn't know what to do. You know, when I was 19, it was easy because I'm like, cool, I can just join the army and they'll give that to me. And they did. For those 6 years, I knew exactly who I was and what I was supposed to be doing. But as soon as I got out, it was back on me. And it was back on, okay, now I have to decide who I am and what I'm going to do. And it was a little messy at first, and I thank God for my wife for her patience and kind of dealing with that and with me at that time. And so I had been a cop in the army, and I figured, you know what, I'll go be a police officer, just stateside, and that's easy. Through that, as I was going through the academy and all that, I realized this wasn't for me. It's not really what I wanted to do anymore. And out of the blue, I get a phone call from a friend who says, "Hey, man, I heard you're back in town where there's a church in the area who's looking for somebody to come and lead worship." Long story short, I led worship a lot as a teenager and as a kid. And so I kind of did that before the army. And so I was like, sure, I'll go. I'm in the area. I could use some music time. I haven't played in a long time. And so went, got connected with the church, ended up becoming from a this was a 1 weekend thing turned into an 8 year ministry opportunity where I went and had a chance to go back to Bible college and become a pastor and learn a lot from the Bible and from other pastors and from other people in the area. And so that was a hard shift from what I was expecting to do. And again, in that process, I learned a lot more about what it means to be a righteous man and a godly man, and how you put the aggression to use, and how you can still be a tender, and you can still be vulnerable but strong. And so I learned a lot that I had missed when I was growing up. I'm getting to my point. My point being is that 3-4 years into the ministry and into the pastoral role, I started to see a lot of myself in some of the younger kids. I wasn't really involved in students ministry, or the college kids or the high school kids, but I could see it. I could see it from my vantage point. I could see a lot of them were lacking some direction. A lot of them were lacking purpose. A lot of them were lacking just strong male role models in their life. And so a buddy of mine, we started talking, and as things go, we're like, hey, we should start a podcast, because that's just kind of how it worked. And so we did. We started a podcast titled Redefining Manliness, where we started taking a look at, hey, and this was during the era of, you see toxic masculinity and everybody's against all this. And so we're like, well, what's the opposite of that? And so we started to look at, what the world was lacking, what the Bible said, and trying to put those two together. And we did that for about a year and a half. And then he moved to Florida. I stayed in Colorado. We started having kids. And so we put that on the back burner. And then about a year and a half ago or so, I restarted the podcast. But instead of saying, hey, here's everything I've learned, take it and let me redefine this, it really transformed for me as here's everything I learned, and I still kind of have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm still figuring it out, and I'm still learning, and I'm still growing. And so I was like, hey, as I'm learning to understand what it means to be a man, why don't you guys join me? And maybe together we can truly understand what it means to be men, which is where the title came from, right? That we're learning, we're growing, we're trying to help each other out and hold each other accountable so that we can become better men, right? And so long story short, I think that was born from a place of seeing, hey, I see a lot of violence. I see a lot of poverty. I see a lot of directionlessness. I see a lot of people walking around without purpose. And in my mind and from my vantage point, that and a lot of the problems that we see are because we're lacking, strong, righteous men that can lead families, that can lead communities, that can lead other young men. And instead of saying, hey, I know you don't know what you're doing, and so you want to go sell drugs, or you want to go fight the kid or shoot the kid that said something dumb, like it's wild how much disaster and violence we can avoid if we were just involved and said, hey, I've been where you are. I know what it feels like. I understand what it means and what it looks like to not know what you're doing and feel like you don't have any other options. So you're just going to go and throw your life away. It gets better. And we can learn and we can walk together, and I can hold your hand and hopefully share everything that I've learned with you so that you can avoid a lot of the mistakes that I made. And so I said, long story short, and then I went for like however long that was. But that's kind of the big
No,
idea
it's
and
good
the big
though.
heart behind that.
Yeah, because it gives a lot of context to one of the concepts that I love to talk about when it comes to purpose is turning your pain into purpose.
It's good.
Because that's what I heard in what you said is that, you had this pain of not having that male role model. And while you were provided for, there was, something missing, and you went out and you looked for it, and you healed through that process, or you're healing through that process, or you're learning through that process. And, um, you see the pain in those kids now. That
Yeah.
was your pain, and you have a purpose to help them
Yeah.
through it, right? To be the light for them.
That's good. I love that. Turn your pain into your purpose. I wrote it down. I got my notes here and I was like, that's good. I'm going to use that.
I love that. I think it's Dean. I don't want to take credit for that. I think that's Dean Graziosi that says it.
You know what? Something I learned is, at first, when you first say something, you're like, so and so said this. And then a few years down the road, you're like, I once heard somebody say this. And then a few
Yeah,
years down the road, you're like, here's what I'm saying. It's just, there's nothing new under the sun. So I'm going to say,
it's so
Diana
true.
said, turn your pen to your
Uh,
purpose.
like, I found it to be true, right? And maybe talk about how you came to that conclusion yourself. Like, this is where my purpose is, and maybe define for us, what do you
Yeah.
perceive your purpose to be?
Yeah. That's good. I think it really kind of came into light, and it's funny because my wife actually asked me this question. I don't know, about a month ago, and it took me a while to give her the answer. She said, "Hey, I had just got done recording an episode and posting and all that stuff, and she said, "Hey, what made you want to become a good man?" Which, first off, I was like, wasn't I always a good man? And I wasn't. She was, it was right, I wasn't, and I had to learn how to do that.
Mm.
But two, it really stirred me up because I'm like, well, there's so many things that happened that made me want to do this or learn from that. But I think the turning point for me was having my daughter. I have two little girls,
Yeah.
both under the age of 4. I have a 4-year-old daughter and one that's about to be 2 in like a week, which blows my mind because I feel like we just brought them home last week. But when that little girl came into the world, it flipped something in me. One, I had this sense of protector that I'd never had like that before. And I mean, again, I'd been an MP in the army. I'd learned to fight and shoot and do all that and be violent and protect and defend. But I never had that just I'm gonna just rip through walls and destroy anything that comes against you, little tiny baby. And so that kind
Hmm.
of came alive in me. And then from there, there's a bunch of other things that awakened up in me that said, hey, this little girl one day is going to become a young woman who's going to meet another guy who is going to get married and do all of those things, and her standard of what a man should be
Hmm.
is me.
Yeah.
I have to set the bar for how she's going to want to be treated and talked to and cared for. And
Mhm.
that weight just, just set on my life. And I said, okay, if I am the standard she's looking to, and if I'm the example she's following, I got to get my stuff in order. And again, at this point, I'd been a pastor for a number of years. I'd been leading, a campus and church and all of that stuff. And so you'd think I would have had my life in order, but something about, having that child and being like, you're watching me, right? Everybody else is seeing me on
Yeah.
Sundays and Wednesdays and, he one-on-ones and coffees. She's
Yeah.
with me 24/7. And she's like, Daddy,
Mhm.
man, somebody once said this. Actually, we'll come back to somebody once said, your reputation is how other people know you, your character is who you are. And while my
Mm.
reputation was great, my character could use some growing. And so that,
Right.
she birthed that in me. And then of course, God in all his sovereignty gave me another daughter and says, you got to do it twice. I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. And so that's really what defined, I don't know if defined my purpose, but made it clear for me of saying, okay, here is why I'm here. I'm here to not only myself become better and learn more and grow, but to challenge others, right? Because again, just like she's watching me, I want to make sure that I'm impacting the young men in our community and in our lives so that when they grow up, I've had a hand in, hey, these guys, have learned from me. And so they'll know how to treat you. They'll know how to talk to you. They'll know how to be around you. And so that really birthed the desire and the purpose of I want to impact generations. I want to impact young men and I want to give away everything that I've learned, right? I say this all the time. I want to help others grow further and go farther and get there faster. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't want you to have to start where I started. Man, I see this all the time with older men and mentors, and it really breaks my heart where they're like, hey, it took me years of blood, sweat, and tears to build what I've built. And so you have to go and do all that and work on your own and get to this level by yourself because I had to struggle by myself. And I'll be honest, that was my mentality a lot of times too. It was like, hey, I had to go and I had to, join the army and I had to pay for my own place and college and all these other things. And then I realized, man, wouldn't it have been great if I had somebody to say, hey, here's, 5 years
Mhm.
of experience that you can jump ahead and share that with me. And so that really became my desire of saying, hey, everything that I've built, everything that I have, everything that I am, It's not for me. It's for other people. And man, if you want to come and stand on my shoulders and reach what I can't reach on my own and what you can't reach on your own, let's go. And that really, again, that
Yeah.
defined my purpose of I want to help others go and grow further, farther, faster.
I love that. We've talked a little bit about using acronyms and
Yeah.
what is it?
Allegory. Yeah. I,
Allegories.
I forget things a lot. And so it helps me to be like, okay, here's, 5 F's and 4 W's. And it works for me.
That's awesome. And so faster, say it
Further,
further,
farther.
farther, faster,
Which
further, farther.
further and farther are kind of the same thing, but reach further, go farther, get there
Okay,
faster.
gotcha. I love it. Um, yeah, I I think what I heard in your story is similar to what I experienced,
Hmm.
but in a different way. So I was thinking about my future daughter before I even like conceived one or had a
Yeah,
husband or anything, right? So,
I
so
was not.
I had this one pain that around just living in scarcity, right? And
Mhm.
so I grew up in a very poor home, not because my parents weren't educated. My parents were actually engineers,
Mm.
and they were educated in Ukraine. And
Oh
so
wow.
my father was Cuban, my mother was Ecuadorian, and my dad was living in a communist country. So when they finished their studies in Ukraine, he had to go back. And
Mm.
in Cuba, there's poverty there, and then from there we went to Ecuador. And in Ecuador, they don't allow anybody that's not Ecuadorian to have a job. It's very patriot,
Wow.
like because of the being patriots,
Yeah.
the jobs go to the Ecuadorians. My dad couldn't, provide there. When we finally got political refuge in the United States, they're working, mopping floors because they can't
Mhm.
speak the language, even though they're engineers. And so they worked so hard to provide. And, my dad was doing things like mixing milk with water, just,
Wow.
so he had milk. And in
Yeah.
Ecuador, we didn't have, running water, warm water, flushing toilet. And I think deep within me, like I understood that education was the way and that they
Mm.
sacrificed so much to be here that I said, my children will never, will
Yeah.
never go through
Yep.
poverty, ever, ever.
I
Right. And
get
so I
that.
got it in my head that I needed to build a life for these future kids that I didn't know I was, who they were, when they were going to come, nothing, but I knew that I was going to build a life for the family. And when I finally met my late husband now, it was like this had to be the man that was going
Yeah.
to show my daughter how he needed to be treated, how she
Yeah.
needed to be treated, right? And so that very, deeply resonates with me because it was
Hmm.
that way for me. Unfortunately, I also have some father wounds in different from yours. Everybody, I think, has different wounds, but and it was my goal to find the person that was going to set that example for how she sh
Yeah.
should be treated in a relationship. And then I got to the point where I was providing really well and I had my career and everything, and something was missing. And it was like, there has to be more to life than this. And
Yeah.
for me, that moment came when my late husband's two best friends suddenly tragically died
Wow.
in a car accident one day. And it was like that feeling like, oh, life is way shorter than we think it is.
Yeah.
We have all this time. But the guiding light was still, I need to make sure that if now I'm saying you need to live life to
Hmm.
the fullest and you need to, go after those passions and that you
Yeah.
fulfill all your dreams, that I have to do that
God did it too.
myself.
Yeah.
Just like that
Yeah.
father has to set the
Yeah.
example for how she should be treated. I have to set the example for what I'm telling her to do so that she
Yeah.
sees it as opposed to just hears it from me. And so
Yep.
that really shifted for me. It's like, I have to, I want to make sure she knows what is possible, right? Like
Yeah.
that powerful force that comes with being a parent. Like it's undescribable. And so much of what you said resonated with that. And I want to talk a little bit about how that like manifests for people. For me, it was like
Mhm.
there has to be more to life than this. And for you, it sounded
Mhm.
like you had something, but you didn't know what you were looking for. Maybe let's talk about, you talked about being directionless. Like why is purpose important? Like why, if we feel like we aren't guided by some purpose,
Mhm.
that maybe we should explore that. And what does exploring that look like?
Yeah,
Right?
that's so good. And let me just touch on what you were talking about earlier about, that lack of the providing and having that being such a big driving force for, defining and refining your purpose. I think, one thing that I tell the guys on the podcast all the time is that we like to live and we want to meet the standards of the five principles of masculinity, which is we have to be pastors in our homes, right? Leaders, lead our wives, lead our children. We have to be providers, which is, what my dad was, but what seems like that's what really defined you. We have to be protectors. We have to persevere and endure through the storms of life. And we have to do all this with purpose. And purpose is what envelops everything and really kind of holds everything together. I think a lot of times people, myself included, it took me a long time to get to this place of like, I have to define who I am and what I'm doing and really have this one just driving force in my life. And I'm still learning how to apply it and how to go beyond just myself and do it in my family. And I'm sure we can touch base on that here in a little bit. But I think a lot of times we think that purpose and vision and direction and all these things are for CEOs, right? That's for the president. That's for the owner of the business. That's for the
Right.
boss. That's for the Joneses. I'm here. I just got to work, put food on the table, and be a good parent or person and just kind of do my thing,
Hmm.
which is such I don't know, it's such a mindset of lacking, right? Of being just like, I'm just content.
Mm.
I know there's nothing wrong with being content. I think we should be content where we are, but there should still be a hunger and a passion for just a little bit more, right? Whether that's more work, more money, more responsibility, more friends, more enjoyment in life, more compassion, more peace in what you're doing. Like we should always want and strive for just a little bit more, a little bit better. And so I tell people all the time, like, you don't have to be the boss of your company. You don't have to be the CEO. You don't have to be the coach. You don't have to be this, big, great, important person because you are an important person, right? You're already an important person. You're already a human being created in the image of the just of God. And so that alone makes you just so valuable and so important. And so why would we not live this short? Like you said, right? Life is short and really the blink of an eye. So why would we not live this life with intentionality and with purpose? And again, it doesn't have to be this, hey, I'm going to go and cure cancer. I'm going to go and feed the hungry in this country and it just eradicate poverty. Those are all wonderful things. But the reality is most of us aren't going to have the opportunity to do these great, big, impactful things, but we have the opportunity to do these small, important things right here where we are. And so I tell people, listen, focus on what drives you, focus on what gives you passion, and do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. If you
Mm.
want to eradicate poverty and you want to feed the hungry, start with one hungry person.
Right.
Be like, hey, here, my purpose is to just right now give you this sandwich and give you this meal. Right. My
Right.
purpose right now is to bring a smile to your face and make you laugh. Right. The purpose doesn't have to be for those of us that are in leadership positions, we do think, kind of bigger picture and here's the 5 year plan and here's where we're going as an organization or a team or as a family. But really, when you can break it down to what are we doing this week that serves other people and that brings us joy? And if that's sharing a meal, if that's sharing a laugh, if that's giving a hug, advice, being patient with your kids, cleaning up your garage, washing your car, like it can be so simple and yet we make it so big and unattainable.
It's interesting that you say that because one of the things that I work with my clients is to actually think bigger, right? Dream bigger, have that big picture vision. And part of it is because if we shoot so low, half the
Mhm.
time we're not, wherever we're shooting, we're usually, coming up right at it or right under it. And if you're shooting bigger, you're
Yeah.
gonna come up somewhere much higher than you would have
Yeah.
if you shoot
And
this
that's,
low.
I think that's great. And I think that's totally fair. But I think from my perspective and from my experience with people is usually we can become so just scared and
Yeah,
frozen
I get that.
from this big great thing. And so I tell people, I was like, look, purpose doesn't require perfection. Purpose requires action. And if all
Yes.
you can take is a small step, take the small
Yeah.
step. Because eventually,
Yeah.
right? And Atomic Habits, is that James Clear? Is that, yeah. He talks about this
Yeah.
all the time about 1% improvement every
Yeah.
single day. You don't have to improve by 100%,
Yes.
50%. You just 1%, one small
Yeah.
thing. And yeah, I think you're right. I think you should have, big dreams, big goals, but I think it's so important to break those down into, for me, whenever I do my
Absolutely.
annual goals, I break them down quarterly, monthly, weekly, and in some cases daily, right? For,
Yeah.
last year, one of my goals was I want to read 50 books this year. And so that means, okay, I've got 52 weeks. That means I've got 2 weeks to take a break. That means I've got 365 days minus the 2 weeks, 340 some days. I got to read this many pages in these many
Yeah.
days, this many weeks. And so I think it's important. And I think you're right when you tell people, hey, reach for these big, great things, but let's break it down and make it, how do we simplify this so that the big, great thing doesn't overwhelm you? And you're like, what's the saying? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a
Yeah.
time.
One bite at a time.
One
Yeah.
bite at a
So
time.
I 100% agree with everything you're saying. And I think part of of having that big picture vision that is larger than life is for the joy and inspiration that it creates
Mm,
in you, right? Like if, you said, well, you want to eradicate world hunger.
right.
Maybe that really is something that brings you a lot of like pain to see, and
Yeah.
therefore you feel called to solve it. And yes, it is overwhelming to say, I'm going to solve world hunger. I can't, but that doesn't mean don't do the little things.
Yeah.
Because that's where people like don't get started and then nothing, they don't do anything because
Yeah.
I can't this, I can't that, I can't that. And anytime you're saying I can't, you're always just saying out loud what your limiting belief is,
Yeah.
right? It's like take the small, I think this is also scripture somewhere. Take the small step and let God do the rest, right?
Yeah.
Because
Be faithful
it
in the little and you'll be faithful in the
yes.
much, right?
Exactly. Yeah, because it is that whatever the big thing is that calls to you is
Yeah.
at least this is what I believe. That's God placed that in your heart because he knows what you're capable of and he's placed
Yeah.
it there for you to achieve it. And it is the little steps that get you to the big thing.
Yeah.
And we underestimate how much we can do um, when we are just trying to swallow it whole, like you
Yeah.
said. Um, and so what do you say to the person that feels like none of that? Because I get what you're saying. Like
Mhm.
it's because they think a vision has to be this big thing or it's not for them or I don't need it. What is it that you would tell someone to start with? It sounds like,
Yeah.
start with your friends, start with like, how do you want to be of service? But
That's key right there. I think that's where you start, right? If you're like, okay, this sounds great, purpose sounds wonderful. Yeah, there's some things that I'm passionate about, but I don't even know how to get started. I tell people all the time, start by serving. Start by
Mhm.
serving. And I know it sounds simple and you're like, well, what does that mean? Like as simple as serving your spouse, serving your kids, serving your friends, serving your
Mhm.
neighbor, whether that's, a phone call to encourage, if that's something that you're really good at, or, we just had a snowstorm here in North Carolina and it was like half an inch. But last time there was like ice and stuff on driveways and
Storm.
like, hey, storm. Like, hey, let's go serve and shovel someone's driveway. And I
Yeah.
know we can think about these things as like, oh, it's good Samaritans. That's what, that's just the Bible talking. I'm like, it's really not. I have discovered, I mean, it is obviously in the Bible, it helps a lot, it has a lot of wisdom. But if you're like, that's not my jam, that's fine. I have discovered more and more clarity and direction in what I'm created to do by serving others. And there's joy not only, and it's a little selfish, right? Because for me, I'm like, man, this is great. This makes me feel so good, just kind of being able to help somebody and serve somebody and just bring a small sense of joy into their life, and through that you define and you refine the process of landing on your purpose, right? I read this somewhere and I can't remember exactly where it was. I think it was in the Seven Habits of Highly Influential People, where he talks about um, he wasn't talking about purpose, but I took it and refined it over to purpose. That purpose is the alignment and the connection and the intersection between your passion and your
Mm,
skill set. It's one thing to be passionate about something, but if you don't have the skill set to do it and to go and put into practice, then nothing's ever going to happen. And so,
right.
how do you develop skill set? By doing it. Right?
Yeah.
It's just if you're like, hey, I'm passionate about teaching kids discipline. All right, cool.
Mhm.
Well, one, start with your kids, or if you don't have kids, sign up to coach a little league. Sign up to go
Yeah.
and help out, at the local YMCA or I used to go to the Boys and Girls Club when I was a kid because my dad obviously wasn't around because he was working, and my mom had to get a job for a season, and so we're like, what do we do after school? And so we would go hang out at the Boys and Girls Club, and there was other, teenagers, young adults that would come and give 2 hours of the time and just play with us and just hang out with us. And we learned so much from them, right? Find what you're passionate about, develop the skill sets to be good at it, and you're going to get closer and closer to your purpose.
Yeah.
But all of that is pointless if you're not taking steps, if you're not taking action, and if you're not being obedient to the call that's in your life, whether you believe it's from God or it's just kind of your internal clock saying, hey, we really kind of want to do this, then do it. And again, it can be so easy to become overwhelmed or like it's just this great thing and that's something else. Man, refine it. If you're man, maybe you're like, hey, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and really the only thing I'm passionate about is cooking. And you're like,
Mm,
okay, is preparing a meal for your kids not super important? Is preparing a meal for your family and making sure that they're fed and nourished? Is that not something? If you're passionate about it, you're obviously skillful at it because you're doing it. How is that not purpose? Right? How is that not something that drives you and moves you? And again, it's something so simple, something so small, and yet it's something so great and such makes such an impact on their children, on their spouse, on their families, on their well-being, on their health, on their mood in the day, right? Because if you're hungry, you're not doing anything else. And now this mom who's at home and saying, well, I'm not really, I don't have this great big purpose. You're impacting every facet of your family's life by doing something so simple to you and yet so big to them. And I think it's so important for us to remember just because
yeah.
it's simple and easy for us doesn't mean it's simple and small for those around us.
I also want to touch that on that a little bit because people do think it's like different things. Like it has to be your job or it has to be your hobby or it has to be your, you know, the way that you what's that called? Like going out on missions and stuff. Like
Mm-hmm.
these things are purpose. I think it is, like you said, what are you passionate about? And then taking it into intention, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that woman was probably cooking anyway. Um, and but there's a different connection to your purpose when you do it with
Yeah.
intention, right?
Yeah.
It's like I'm going to do this from a place of intention. I'm going to cook for them to nourish them, like you said, to nourish their bodies, to nourish their mental health. And then because I know this about myself, I'm going to use it to serve others. Maybe it is in the immediate term, my family, but
Yeah.
maybe it is at some point the person down the street or the person at church or the person online that isn't that passionate about it and just wants some easy meals to cook for their their
Yeah.
family, that to nourish them in ways that like you said, it supports their entire life, whether it be their brain health or their body health. Keeps them focused, it keeps them energized and engaged.
Yeah, man,
um
I can't even think how many small businesses we've seen come up out of people seeing a need, one, being passionate about something, and then having the skill set to do something about it, right? You think about Uber
right.
and Lyft and all these mom and pop shops. You're like that they saw a need, they're good at doing this, they're passionate about it, and now what started off as something small in their home, in their living room, in their family, has grown into a business and make an impact across the world. So I tell people, do not underestimate small beginnings, small steps.
When you say you see a need, it goes back to pain to purpose too. It's not only like
Yeah,
your pain,
yeah,
and turning it into purpose, but seeing someone else's pain and turning that into purpose.
yeah.
Like,
It's good.
yeah, right? Like, oh, I'm one of those people. Like, I do not. Cooking is not my passion, right? Like, cooking is not my passion, and I struggle to like do the meals that I know are good and healthy. But yeah, I spend a lot of time on it and looking it up and all of that. And there's so many now meal prep.
Yeah.
companies that have come out of that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it all started with just, you know, because I saw one almost start. She ended up pivoting her business, but it just started with like her immediate circle. Like she was meal prepping for like 12 people, and
Yeah.
it's just people get overwhelmed by the how.
Yeah.
But I can't, how am I ever going to do that? And it's really like the wrong how, not like how am I ever going to do that? It's like curious about how to do it, right? Like how would I be able to do that? And like actually seeing yourself the way, God sees us. Like you
Yeah.
are capable of all things. Like
That's good. That's good. Well, and I think you're right, right? We focus so much on the how and the what that we ignore the most important one of those, the why, right?
yes,
When you know
that.
the why you're doing something, when you know
Mhm.
this is why I get up every day. This is why I cook these meals. This is why I read these books. This is why I connect with people. The what, the how, that'll come. That'll come and you'll figure it
Yeah.
out and it'll change, right?
Yeah.
You'll probably do something a certain way and then you'll learn and hopefully you'll learn and you'll grow. And then now you've changed what you're doing and even how you're doing it. But as long as your why is consistent, then everything else falls into place. I tell people, look, don't focus so much on the activity, focus on the identity. Your purpose is not rooted in
Yeah.
activity, it's rooted in identity. It's rooted in who
I
you
wrote that
are.
down
In
before.
yeah. I'm like, why do you exist? Why are you doing this? What you're doing, that'll come. How you're doing it,
Yeah.
you'll figure it out. Just be solid on the why. And of course, one of the books I tell people all the time is Start with Why. Start with Why by Simon
Yes.
Sinek has
Simon
made
Sinek.
such an impact on my life. And I recommend it to people every time they're like, I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure out what to do or how to do it. Start with why.
Yes, I love that. I love Simon Sinek. I love that you said identity because I wrote it down to loop back to that because it is about that. It is
Yeah.
about our identity. I think about like even as you were talking, what came to my mind was like artists, right? Like
Hmm.
film artists, dancers, musicians, like they have such a passion for their art, and they pursue it. And I think that it's beautiful that they have the skill and that they have the passion. And I think most of them, when they finally connect in a way that allows them to grow exponentially, like what makes the difference
Yeah.
between the artist that like grows in such a huge way versus like the artist that stays keeping it about their art and themselves.
Hmm.
It is that's the difference. Like the ones that grow are really clear on like the pain, right? Like wanting people to feel seen, that, that
Yeah.
dancer that, knows what it's like to process out the pain of loss
Yeah.
through dance, or the person that um, writes the song that really touched their heart and that connected with other people, or just like connecting with that versus just going through the motions of doing something is
Yeah.
is what makes the difference, right? And let's talk about identity. And I did want to talk about loop back because you brought up the books again. And like, what led you to do it was 50 books, right? 50 book
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah.
And what you
Well,
what led you to it? And how did you grow from that? What did you learn from that?
what led me to it was pride, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But I want to jump in on identity because you said something that just I love. You're talking about the artists and what they're creating and why they created and why it connects and why the art exists. And it reminded me of one of my favorite Bible passages of all times that I think speaks directly into identity and into art, which that we are art, right? And this is Ephesians chapter 2 verse 10. It says we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus through God for the good works that God has prepared beforehand for us. And so that I think about that, I'm like, we're the masterpiece, we're the art, we're the creation that God prepared not only just to exist, but to have good works that He prepared for us. And so, I
Mm.
mean, that for me, that ties identity, that ties purpose. Like, I'm a piece of art, I'm like, whether I'm rough around the edges and I might not be a Pollock, but I'm a piece of art. I'm a work of art. I'm a workmanship, and there's purpose and plan for my life. And so anytime I get discouraged, I'm like, I don't know, I'm just a dude. I remember that passage, Ephesians 2:10, and it just impacts me and it moves me. And what you were saying about the art is just like clicked it for me. And I was like, yes, yes, identity, workmanship, bam, go do it. I
Yes,
love
I
that.
love that. I love that because sometimes what happens for me at least is that we start to almost forget that
Mhm.
we were made on purpose for a purpose. My
Yeah.
pastor's
On purpose, for
Pastor
purpose, with
Phil,
purpose,
on purpose for a purpose. What did you say? With
with
purpose?
with purpose. That's right.
We keep it in threes.
It makes it easier for me.
Nice. There's right, like even that is like a quirk of yours, right? You talk about
Yeah.
that, how you keep the three, but it's like we
Yeah.
really were made exactly the way we are for a
Mhm.
purpose. Like
Mhm.
all of our quirks, all of our uniqueness makes
Yeah.
us the only one of us in the whole
Yeah.
wide world.
Which is
And
wild to
that
think about, right?
Yes. And that is what finds us in the unique places that we are, right? Like the way the mix of all our passions and all our hobbies and all the things that call to us and all the personality differences and all the, different tastes in music, even the
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
tastes in like it puts us in very unique places and circles. Why? Because that is where we're meant to
Yeah.
serve. Those
Yeah.
are the people that we connect with. Those are the people that we will be able to impact in our lives. And
Yeah.
so when we talk about the people like the accountant, right? Like I just like numbers and this is what I
You're
do and I'm
already a
really good
rare.
at it. So there,
I said the accountants are wonderful because I don't like numbers. So I'm like, I'm so glad that you do because I would
yeah.
be in so much trouble with the IRS if you didn't exist.
Right. So it's like, but you're this way on purpose and you're going to serve people and touch people and don't take that for granted.
Yeah.
And when I get frustrated with like, I was talking just today actually about how like it's so hard for me to like let certain things go.
Mm.
Like I start to be very persistent and persevering, and that's good
Yeah.
sometimes, right? Like you think about like, oh, I don't give up, but it also like will keep me spiraling on some things, so I have to keep it in check. But so, but that also puts me in like endurance sports, right? It also will put me in certain coaching conversations where like I know I there's more there. I need to dig deeper. And
Yeah.
it just like it's a unique trait maybe that creates challenges and frustration. But
Sure.
then I have to remember, like remind myself, yes, and the, there's so much other stuff that comes from that, right? Like
Yeah.
when you talk about like the three P's, I think it's fabulous that you do that because it makes certain things very like digestible and very
Yeah.
like
Well, I'm
memorable
glad
and
because that's for me, yeah. Well, let me touch on that what we were talking about first. That you're right. It's so amazing that out of 7 billion people plus, right, there's not one person like you, like me, like the listener. There's people that are similar, that have similar strengths and
right.
perhaps similar backgrounds, but nobody has lived the exact experience that you have, not only just living, but in the history of the world. You are a unique combination of skills, passions, backgrounds, upbringing. I mean, financial, like all of that is so unique to you. And then so many times we're just like, ah, that's just the way that I am. And that's just the way that I
Mm,
am. And we can sometimes even use that as a crutch, right? For, coming back to my example, I forget things so much. I'm not a forgetful person. I have to write down. I've got, my little journal here for like I'm taking notes and I wrote down kind of what I wanted to talk and what we were talking about because it's just not in my skill set to be, attentive to detail or to remember things. And so I have to be very intentional about how I write, how I speak, and all these things. And for the longest time, I said, well, that's just the way that I am. That's just, that's not my
mm,
skill set. That's not my gifting. And so I'm just going to really lean into what I'm good at and ignore this other side of it because that's just not who I am. And I had a mentor of mine tell me, he's like, listen, there's going to come a point where your weakness is going to overshadow your strength. And I say all that to say, just because this is how you are and you were
mm,
made uniquely in this way doesn't mean that we shouldn't stretch ourselves and that we shouldn't try to grow and become better. And so for me, right, that meant allegory was a huge tool. I learned, the army is huge on acronyms, right? Leadership and AAC and like there's so much so that kind of ingrained it in me. But then further on to help myself remember phrases or remember important things in my life, I I write it out in allegories. I'm like, cool, I've got my 5 ways to win the morning. They're all W's. I've got my 5 foundations for life. They're all F's. And so there's things that just help me remember because I'm not good at this. And so I'm gonna give myself some covering and some strength. And I think all of us should look at and take a good look at ourselves and say, what am I really good at? What I need to work on? Where's the balance?
I was going to talk about like everything that you're saying, including probably the books, is all about intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I would love to talk about, even when you talk about the 5 foundations for life, and this ties back to identity too, because it's about our values, right? Like all the things that you talked about, our background, our experiences, that shaped us, shaped what we value.
Yeah.
And so, when we talk about the 5 F's for life, it's, and I'll let you dig into that deeper. It's like deciding this is who I am, this is what I value.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to live my life in such a way that supports this. And it's
Yeah.
about having that vision align with your purpose, right?
Yeah.
And so what was your purpose behind the books? And, how else do you bring, like, why do we need that
Yeah.
intentionality? Because I know in my life, when I hit that moment where I was like, there has to be more to life than this, I looked back and I realized I just kept going with the path of least resistance. And they were all great decisions. I'm not saying I
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
like I made great decisions as far as, I had a good job that I was good at and I, made good money and we lived in a nice house and I had a good marriage. Like I had no reason to
Mm-hmm.
feel like a failure in life, right? And yet I knew something was missing because I made these decisions, good decisions, but not aligned with what was really inside of me and my
Yeah.
heart and my soul as the difference and the impact that I wanted to make that wouldn't shut up inside me, right? But I was just like, yeah, but this makes sense and I'm good at it and I'm enjoying it and I'm making money. And I had all these limiting beliefs about why I couldn't do the other
Yeah.
thing. And so I think when I talk about intention, I do it in this way, like, do you want to just jump on a boat and
Mm-hmm.
let the river of life take you where it wants to, or are you going
Yeah.
to steer the boat to where you want to go? And I don't know if I always communicate, and I feel like you communicate things in a way that really pierce through people. So I want to hear it from you.
Yeah.
Um, and why intentionality is important, why we need it, and how do we start or, you know, yeah. I
Yeah.
hear
That's
like
that's good.
the books thing is this kind of a simple, like, I'll just like start with something like that. But I don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe it took
Yeah.
you a journey to get there too.
It is, and it's still a journey. And I'm still kind of figuring it out. So I'll touch a little bit on the book. So last year, 2024, one of my goals for the year was to read 50 books. And that wasn't really from a place of, I mean, yeah, there was some like I want to grow, I want to be intentional with my development and all of that stuff. But if I'm being really honest, is also a little bit of a pride thing. The year
Okay.
prior, I had read 30 books, and I was like, 30 books is the most books I've
Okay.
ever read in a year. And I'm like, and I hadn't, I was always a big reader when I was in school. When I was a kid, I would honestly, I would skip class and go hide in the library and read, Harry Potter and all of that stuff. So I've always loved to read. And I had kind of taken a hiatus from it. I stepped away. And then as I got back into ministry, I picked it up again, obviously with my Bible and a bunch of other books, because I'm like, I'm in a place of leadership and I'm responsible. And so there's only so much I know. I need to learn from other places. And so that fed it. But if I'm fully frank, it was a little bit of like, cool, I did 30, I can do 50. And I started reading these books, and it was a book a week. And I stayed through pretty much, halfway through the year, I got to 25, 28 books. And I couldn't remember 3/4 of the books. I had read all these books,
Um,
and I'm sure I had retained something, but I'm like, I read this book? And I had notes, right? Give me one second. I'm gonna grab one of the books and I'll show you kind of how I do it.
nice. No, that's awesome because that also shows intentionality behind reading the books, right? Like you
Yeah.
have the intention to take something away from it, not just read it. Wow,
Yeah.
you have like all
So
these flags in there.
yeah. So this is like my daily breakdown, right? Each flag is a day: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
Okay.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that's what
I
pages
see.
I'm
Okay.
reading to get there by the week. And then as I'm reading it, I'm highlighting things in the book, and whatever I'm highlighting,
Huh.
I'll bring it up closer. I'm like writing down in the cover.
Oh,
So there's the
okay.
page, there's the highlight, and it helps me. I can pick up the book again, years down the road and
I
be
like
like,
that.
okay,
You like made your
page.
own appendix.
Yeah, pretty much, right? Page, right here, 61, eliminate whatever isn't related to your vision. Bam, perfect. Now I can go back to page
Okay.
61 and see, hey, I highlighted this. Why did it stand out to me? And so, anyways, I was doing all this. And so at least I had something to show for the reading I had done. But internally, again, it was like drinking from a fire hydrant. I wasn't
Oh,
retaining as much as I had the year prior. I was like drawing blanks on books. And I realized, one, I'd bitten off more than I could chew. I had to come down, and if I wanted to actually grow from these books, I had to be more intentional in what I was reading. So I was reading there were some books that were impactful, and they lined up with my ministry, with my five facets, focuses, foundations, whatever you want to call them, for life. There were some books that really tied into that, and there were some books that I was like, I just need to get my numbers. So I'm reading this book, and so I had to pause and regroup and say, okay, I need to actually read books that connect to my vision, connect to my why, connect to the things that matter to me, and then go to the end of the year. And so I didn't make it to 50. I got to 38. So I still beat my last number. A little
mm-hmm.
bit of pride in that. But I was able to adjust and refocus why I was doing it. And so
Mm.
all that to say, the intentionality behind it. I I wasn't intentional when I started. I said, I just want to read 50 books. It doesn't matter which books. I just want to get to the number. Halfway through is when that intentionality clicked and said, if I'm going to spend all this time away from my family, right? Because now if I'm reading a book a week, that means I got to spend at least 30 minutes to an hour reading a night. And so I got to make sure if I'm intentional about that time that I'm going to spend away from my family, I'm saying yes to this. That means I'm saying no to something else. I have to be intentional on what books I'm taking then. And so I started selecting books that tied into, again, my five focuses, which I'll share that with you guys real quick. The five focuses for my life are my faith, my family, my fitness, my finances, and my future. And so everything I do, should do, revolves around those things, right? All my hobbies, all the business ideas that we want to do, all of the ministry things that we want to do, everything that we do in our life revolves around those five things. And so being intentional means I know what's important to me. I know what I value. I know where I want to go. And so now I have to funnel all my decisions, everything that could come up in life, and say, does this get me closer to this? Is reading 50 books fitting the five focuses of my life? Well, if I'm reading books on finances, or if I'm reading books on faith, or if I'm
Mm.
reading books that help me for the future, then yes, that helps. If I'm reading nonfiction, or if I'm reading things that don't really relate to what I value, then no, that's not helping. And so it made it easy for me to say immediate yeses and gracious nos to things in life
Mm.
that didn't align with what I was valuing. And I think that's such an important thing when it comes to intentionality. Know what you value, know what you want, and be intentional in what you allow to take up your time, your treasure, your talent, and everything that you do.
I love that. I love that. It's so much about boundaries there too, right? Because it's not just like, what books do we read? It's like, where do we put our
Yeah.
time? Where do we put our energy? Who do
Yeah.
we, interact with? Who do we, what activities do we partake in? Because you're
Yeah.
so right when you say every yes is a no to something else.
Mm-hmm.
So every yes to, like,
It could be
you name
something
it,
good.
Netflix,
Yeah.
or even something good. It could be
Yeah.
a great project at work, but guess what? It also maybe means that your passion project doesn't get done. So,
Yeah.
it could be that, you help a friend, but does that
Yeah.
mean now that you don't help your family? Like,
Yeah.
you only have like a set amount of hours in your day.
Yeah.
Who are you going to allot them to? So I forget who says this, but it's like, show me where you spend your money and your time, and I'll tell you what your values are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what my mom used to say. Tell me who you hang out with, and I'll tell you who you are. Right. And actually, scripture
Yeah,
says that
that
too. I think
too.
in Corinthians, something like that. But yeah, I think it's so important for us to track. And again, I know it can become like, well, there's so much, and it's so like, why would I have to be so diligent with this and intentional with that? And like, well, because at the end of the day, your life matters, and what you do matters, and the people that you impact matter. And so why would you
Right.
not set yourself up to be the biggest impact that you can be. And so I always like to give people like practical steps. Okay, how do you apply this, right? For me, it was writing down my values. And I did that.
Mm.
I used to do that every year, starting off the year. Normally they didn't change, but sometimes, like, oh, I valued this, but I didn't really focus on that this year. So maybe it needs to change, or maybe I need to be more intentional on doing that. This last year, my wife and I actually got together and we put together, family values, and what do we value as a family, and what's our mission statement, what's our purpose as a family, and how do we say
Mhm.
yes to things that get us closer to that, and how do we say no to things that keep us away. So, one
Right.
practical step that you guys can do is write down your values. It doesn't have to be an exhaustive list. We try to limit it to 7 values, just because we're Christians and 7 is the perfect number. So we're like seven numbers, 7 values. Whether it's I value loyalty, I value my health, I value joy, I value money, I value travel. What do you value? What stands out to you? What is so important to you that you're like, I cannot live without this? Write that down and let that kind of be the filter to what you do, when you do it, and why and how you do it. And then from there, I tell people, okay, now that you've got your values, start praying, start reflecting, start thinking about, who do I want to become, not what do I want to do. Right?
Mhm.
Like for me, that really came into help when I started talking about fitness. Right? I When I started saying like I value fitness, I I didn't really want to go to the gym. I didn't really want to run. Like I'm like, I don't like doing that stuff. But then I realized I want to become a person who does. I want to become a
Mm.
healthy person. I want to become a
Mhm.
person who likes to go to the gym, who likes to run. And so what does that person do? Well, that person goes to the gym, and that person is healthy, and that person and so I started living a little bit kind of in the future version of me, right? I'm like, in the future,
Yeah.
Jonathan is very healthy and in great shape. Well, that means that in the present, Jonathan has to do these things so that
Yeah.
in the future I can be that. And so I tell people
Yeah.
all the time, listen, focus on who you want to become, not on
Yeah.
what you want to do. And lastly, I tell people, when we talked about it earlier, if you don't know, if you've gone through your values, you've gone on to who you want to become, and you're still kind of uncertain, unsure, serve, help somebody,
Mm.
serve somebody, give yourself away, and it'll become more and more clear, especially
Yeah.
when you're intentional about it.
Yeah. Because you also, the people that you will be more likely to want to serve will be unique to you also.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the more you kind of refine your values, the more you start to see other people that have those same values, other people that share the same desires, share the same skill set, and that you can help them and they can help you, and you can grow together and go further, right? Further, farther, faster, when you do
Yeah.
it in a group, when you do it with people that are like-minded, that share those same passions. But again, if you're not intentional about it, if you're not intentional about
Yeah.
setting your values, about blocking your time, about setting up boundaries and priorities, then you're gonna just, like you said, let the river take you, and you'll never find a
Yeah.
good tight knit community of fellow rowers.
You're a book reader. Did you ever read The Alchemist?
No, I don't think I did. I've
You'll
heard of
have to
it,
put
but
it
I've
on your
never read it.
list.
Yeah, it's on my list.
That's all yes. So what I loved about The Alchemist is that it really solidified that concept for me of like whatever you're called to do is just like a micro step to the big picture, right? Like you uniquely are found in a place because you're called to something else, but in that place, you
Mm,
were enlightened in such a way to change that place that in a way that nobody else would have been. Do you know what I mean? Like it's that being intentional and in those small steps that you're taking towards the big, what you where you think you're gonna go,
yeah,
you're actually impacting the space that you're in a unique way that
that's good.
if you weren't there, it wouldn't have happened, right? And so it all is kind of for a reason, right? That's the other thing
Mm.
I say. It's like everything happens for a reason. I can't take credit for that one. But yeah,
That one,
everything
that
is
one people would
for a
know
reason.
wasn't made up by you, but
So, but when you talked about the values, one of the exercises I do with my clients, and I do this, it was actually one of the most impactful things that I did with a coach right before my late husband passed, because I was actually struggling with the exercise, and it's because it ties both. It ties values and it ties to identity, because it's just in 3 words. What are the 3 words that describe the best of who you are? Because the
Mm.
best of who you are isn't necessarily who you are right now. It's kind of the best of who you aspire to be. And I was like, I don't know about the best of who I am. I don't know about these three words. And I was struggling with it. And that coach said, well, why don't you ask like the closest people to you what they think the best of who you
Yeah.
are is, right? And my late husband gave me his three words like the day he went to the hospital because he was sick that
Oh,
week.
wow.
Yeah. And it was just such a gift to have it um before I lost him.
Yeah. I
And
bet you remember
like
that.
right
You'll,
before I left.
you'll never
Yeah.
forget those three words.
No
That's,
way. Um and they ended up being kind of my like I would say they're my values, but in a unique way in that they're character traits, I guess. It
yeah.
was it was courage, right?
Mm.
Love and integrity.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
so I I was like, really, courage? Wow, you would say that about me. But the thing is, like, the reason it's values and how you said now you ask yourself every time,
Hmm.
does this align with my values? Yes, no, easy answer, right? And now you make the
Mm.
decision based on that. In the same way, when I'm struggling with a decision, what is the courageous thing?
Mm.
Right? Like, what is the courageous thing? What is the thing that is grounded in love? What is the thing that is grounded in integrity? What is the right thing, even if it is the hard thing, right? And it's that became the kind of the foundation that then I went to my daughter because then it was just the two of us.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, I think we should really make it a point to. My daughter's only 9, and I think we did this exercise when she was like 7.
Which is great. Sometimes kids get it so much more than we do. They're just like their
Right?
minds are so just innocent and just open. They're like, okay. And you're like, man, it took me
Sure, yeah,
years.
let's do it. So what do you think? And I sat her down and I talked about what I thought these would be, and then we added faith,
Hmm.
right? We're always going to be centered on faith. We're going to believe that all things are working together for our good, and we're going
Yeah.
to believe that, the best is yet to come because
Yeah.
God's got us, right? And so basically trust is I wear that on my wrist.
Let's do it.
Trust in and having that faith, right? And then I said, is there anything that you would add? And she said, I forget how she said it, but it ties back to what you said about joy. Um, I think she said playfulness. I think that's where we
Mm.
landed. But it's
Good.
around, laughter and playfulness and joy. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks, like, oh my God, I had left that out. And she called me out on it.
That's
And
good. Well, I tell you,
yeah.
that's what kids are great.
And it is that like clarity on, are we still in alignment as a family now? Like the two of
Yeah.
us. Are we still so yeah, sometimes I'm like, have I been playful enough? Have I laughed enough with my daughter? Can I be,
Good.
more? And she said that it tied back to daddy because
I love
daddy
that.
always set the intention in every room, no matter like you could, cut the silence with a knife, like they say, like in a room, and he made it a point, like on the way to the hospital, even, or maybe when he was already there, he mentioned once to me, um, sometimes it's just really hard for me not to tell a joke. Like, because he has this
Good. Yeah.
intention, like I am gonna make people laugh. And he did
Right.
that all day, every day, all the time. So he had joked with his friends,
Mm.
with his cousin and his uncle, I think it was, that Uber had a special pandemic service where they put you in the trunk. Take you
Oh my
to the
gosh.
hospital. Yeah, so,
Oh, that's so funny.
so yeah, on the way to the hospital, he was still making jokes because that was his intention. He brought,
Yeah.
joy and laughter because he wanted to, not because, that was his
Yeah. It's just
unique calling to do. It didn't mean like I'm sure he had to work at that. You know what I mean? Like it's
yeah,
not
of
like,
course.
and I think there's intention and there's identity wrapped around it, and
Yeah.
there's
Well, and then
um
to think even like, I'm sure he was aware of this. And even if he wasn't, like, he was leading from a place of legacy. Because now your daughter is like joy and happiness and playfulness and
yeah,
there's all this because my dad used to do that, right? And so
yeah,
I love that. I think
yeah.
that's such a wonderful story and such a great testament of what we do, even if we think it's just, oh, this, I just tell jokes. This is just who I am. it's impacting somebody. And now that's become a core value in your life, in your daughter's life, that dictates like that. That's why we live with intentionality. And that's why I always harp on people to live with the legacy in mind. Think about the future, who's
Yeah.
watching, who's observing. That's wonderful.
Are people watching. There
Yeah.
are people watching, no matter who you are. Somebody is watching you, and if you're being intentional or not, they are following in your footsteps. And some people are like, who am I?
Yeah.
In any role that you're in, somebody is watching you
Yeah.
and taking notice, and
Yeah.
they are either being inspired by you or poorly influenced by you. Like, which one do
Yeah.
you want to be?
Yeah.
Right? And it's just shocking to me, sometimes even like on like how many times, parents that aren't being intentional are behaving
Mm,
in ways in
mm,
front of their children, right? Like, and it's not just the children, it's like your coworkers are watching you. You start working out, you start,
yeah.
taking care of yourself, you lose weight, you start showing up differently, you start having joy in your life. People
Yeah.
are gonna get curious and they're gonna
Yeah.
be inspired by that. Like,
Yeah.
even if they're not saying anything about it,
Yeah.
you are impacting people all around you all the time.
My wife and I were just talking about this the other day, and she actually gave me a great, idea for the next podcast episode, about the silent influence. I don't know if that's probably what I'm going to call it, silent influence. Because I actually had a young man reach out, talking about people watching and observing. I just started going to a new gym, and I have the 2B Men podcast Instagram page, and so I posted a few stuff about the gym and whatnot. And he goes to the same gym, and I don't know if they tagged me or shared something. He saw that, which led him to the page, which led him to the podcast, and he started listening and observing and all that stuff. And he reached out to me last week. He's like, "Hey man, I just wanted to reach out. I go to the same gym, and I've been wanting to grow and learn all these things. And I saw your podcast, and it inspired me. And I'd love to grab lunch and or a cup of coffee if you have some time." And I'm like, "Yeah, of course, absolutely. I'll make time." And so we went and grabbed coffee, and just was a great time just to connect and share some wisdom and just be with him and get to see. It was cool to see the receiving end of what you're putting out, which is kind of cool. But then I was talking to my wife about that. Like, man, how awesome is that? Like, here's a kid that I've never met. I had no idea he was watching, and yet he's observing. And because I've been intentional about, hey, I'm going to go to the gym. Now he's like, hey, that's something that I like. Let me see what else we have in common. And now he's being impacted by things that I did, years ago. And so she was talking about, man, that's just somebody that came forward. So think about all the
Mhm.
opportunities you've had to speak, whether at church or at conferences, or, I've had the opportunity to go across the world, went to Central America, Asia, Africa, do things there. Every Sunday, leading worship from the stage at my church through the podcast. She's like, think how many people you've impacted through that you don't even know. They've never mentioned it. They never reached out, and think about the silent impact. And that just, I was like, whoa. So
Yeah.
all that to say, like, yes, people are watching, people are observing, and look, that's a big responsibility to say, like, okay, people are watching me, and so I have to be, I don't want to say on my best behavior, but I also want to live a life that is worth watching. I can't remember who said this, so I'm going to take it as my own. Somebody, it was one of those, some influencer or something. He said, "I live my life as if I have a camera crew following me around and recording a documentary." And that made me think, I was like, oh man, would this be good TV? Right? If somebody's watching TV and I'm just kind of hanging out on my phone, like, is that what they want to
Yeah.
see? Right? If I'm not
Yeah.
just wasting my time, I'm like, oh man, if they're following the camera crew's following me around, then I want them to see, hey, I'm up early and I go to the gym and I do all these things that are important and that have impact. And so I think impact is such a huge thing, and legacy is such an important facet to everything that we do. I tell people, lead with legacy in mind, lead beyond the moment. Don't be so focused on the here and now. That's important. That's great. But think about tomorrow and think about who's going to take everything that you've built. And I tell people, listen, if everything you've built, everything you've done, everything you've said dies with you, you've wasted your time. You've wasted it. Like, you have to give this away. You have to give it to somebody else and let them, again, go further, reach farther, get there faster because of what you built. And I love what you're talking about your husband, right? I always say what you model matters, right? What you model matters. What you live, how you carry yourself, how you speak, all of that matters. And you get to see that firsthand because now your daughter's like, I want to be joyful. I want to be playful because my dad modeled something that mattered. And even though he's not with us now, the impact is further and greater than just his life. And so that fires me up. Talking about legacy, I'm like,
Yeah.
that's so
Yeah.
important.
Actually, you mentioned a quote. I don't know who said this either. It was on a podcast somewhere, but I don't know if it's I'm being called to mention it now because it popped up when you said, imagine a camera crew was following you around. Would that be good
Yeah.
TV? And I heard a similar quote, but it was, if someone were filming your life
Mm.
and you were watching it, what would all the audience be screaming at you to do? Right? Like, you know how when you're watching the scary movie
That's
or
good.
watching the romance comedy and you're like, just kiss the girl, or you're
Yeah.
like, he's behind you, right? And it's so
Yeah.
funny, like whatever it is that you're you would imagine yourself screaming at the screen
That's
to
pretty good.
do that.
Do it. Do it.
Do it.
That's so
Yeah.
great. I love what Maya Angelou says, right? She says, your legacy is all the lives that you've touched. And then, Proverbs, I think I wrote it down, 13. It says, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children. And so that is just, it's in my life beyond my like I'm trying to get my finances in a way that I can leave an inheritance. But beyond that is, living a life like your late husband did, that is just impactful. And he made people laugh. We're like, oh man, that's a great, that's everybody loves that character in the movies, right? The guy that's funny and the guy that makes people laugh, like, that's cool. I love that. What does it do it? I'm doing it. Write that down.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. So this has been so awesome. I love talking all things legacy and vision and purpose and being
Uh,
intentional. This was such a pleasure. Thank you so much
yeah, thank you for
for
having me. This has been
this
such a
conversation.
joy.
Um, so I think maybe we wrap on that. It's like, and and when you say the legacy, leave it for your children, I also want to make sure, like, because you and I, we're parents, we say,
Yeah,
our children, but everyone has that someone that they can
yeah.
influence and impact. It could be, a niece, a nephew. It could be,
It could be a coworker, it
just
could be your
co
neighbor,
yeah,
it could be.
exactly.
It doesn't have to
Someone
be your
that you
children. For
can
us, it's
mentor.
easy to think your kids, right? Because they're there, and that's like, I've got you for 18 years. But for somebody else,
Yeah.
there's so many other people that
Yeah,
are in their
because we
lives and
think
that they can.
absolutely we think this person is following us around all the time, every day, on our bad days, our good days, our okay days, right? And so it's very prominent in our minds, but our work, we spend 40
Mhm.
hours minimum a week in front of these people, right? Like these people are
Yeah,
seeing us every day under pressure, on good days, on bad days when you're coming into work anyway. Like you notice that you're also in front of them
yeah,
when they're having good days and bad days
yeah,
and,
yeah,
not so good days. And it is true that people are watching, and
yeah,
that if you're intentional, imagine the greater impact that you can have.
yeah. I'll share three quick thoughts on this because again, I love this about intentionality and influence and all that stuff. So I don't want to take too much more time. But I think there's so much power in community and in accountability. I think
Yes.
there's isolation is the death of purpose, of vision. Nobody's made it by themselves. There's not a single person who has succeeded and reached the highest of highs on their own. And so we were created to be in community and to support one another, right? Proverbs says this, as iron sharpens iron, so one friend sharpens another. And so I think it's so important for us to surround ourselves with people that sharpen us, that challenge us, that help us grow, that hold us accountable. That's what I do. That's what we do at 2B Men. We tell each other we're here to challenge one another, hold each other accountable, and help each other become better. And so I think it's so valuable for us to be in community. And we talked about this earlier, right? Your circle determines your direction. The people that are around you, who you're surrounded by, at the end of the day, they have a big voice and a big say in where you end up and where you end up going. And so I think we have to be, again, intentional in who we surround ourselves with. And,
Yes.
and lastly, accountability accelerates growth. When you have somebody who can hold you accountable, who can say, hey, man, you say you value this, So if you're
Yeah.
doing this and it doesn't line up with that, what's up? And it's hard. It's hard to have those conversations, but we have to have those people in our lives that we can be vulnerable with, that can be hard with us, and that can hold us accountable so that we can accelerate our growth. I love, obviously Paul in the Bible is a huge, influence in any Christian's lives. And one of my mentors always said, you need a Paul, a Silas, and a Timothy. Those three guys
Mm.
spend a lot of time together. Paul and Silas, they were brothers. They were friend to friend. And so you need a relationship of somebody who can you can just as equals, you can talk to, you can connect with, you can share burdens with, you can just vent to, and you're equals. Paul and Timothy, right? Paul had Timothy, which was a mentoree, a son, and he said, "Hey, here's what I have. Here's what I've learned. Here's what I've gained. I'm giving it to you to give to others and to share with others so that they can grow as well. And I'm just giving it all away." And Timothy had Paul. He had a mentor. He
Mhm.
had a teacher. He had a father who was speaking into him and who was sharing wisdom and life advice and values with him and just flaming the fire that he had for the gospel and for his purpose. And so I tell people, find yourself a Paul, right? Find yourself a mentor. Find somebody who you admire, who you want to be like, who you see certain aspects of their life and you're like, that guy has what I want, or he has a semblance of it, or I just love the way he speaks, or whatever, and
Or they
connect with
went
them.
through something similar,
Yeah,
right?
somebody that you connect with and you're like, I want to learn from them. So man, I tell people all the time, reach out, offer to buy them a cup of coffee. Like I recently did this with a Spanish pastor of one of the largest churches in the States, and he's in Texas. And I'm like, he might reach, but he might not. But I'm trying to help our Spanish ministry here at church. And so I was like, let me reach out and see what happens. We got connected and we've had some great conversations, and we're building a friendship and a mentorship relationship. And I'm like, that's awesome. That he would take the time. I'm like, I'm nobody in this field, and yet he's taking the time to share and pour that out. People are hungry to give what they've gained. And so go and find yourself a mentor. Find yourself, right, a Paul. Find yourself a Timothy, someone that you can pour into, someone that you can share your life with, someone that you can give everything away to. Whether in my case, it's your children or it's your coworkers or it's, people at your gym or somebody who's in your life or just someone that you've noticed, hey, this kid seems to come to this coffee shop all the time when they're supposed to be at school and now they're just hanging out here. Maybe I can strike up a conversation and just share some with him. Just as people are hungry to give, people are hungry to receive. And so I think it's important for us to find Paul, find a Timothy, and lastly, find a Silas, find a brother, a sister, someone who is an equal to you, someone that you can vent to and just pour your heart out and say, I'm walking through this. I need some help. Can you hold me accountable? Can we do this thing together?
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. As you were talking, the one last point that I wanted to kind of hit on with you. We're never going to get off this
Yeah, we're gonna it's
conversation.
gonna be 3 hour long. We're gonna release this in 3 segments: part one, part two, part three. That's not a bad idea, actually.
But he was you know, when do we step into leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
And intentionality, and when do we hand it over
Mm,
to trust and to
so good.
faith, right?
I actually have a great book for this too.
Ooh.
I have my books split up.
And this is with our growth, right? Too, like just like when do we say, I want to grow in this way? I'm going to go out and learn the things and do the things and meet the people and reach out to the person versus when am I going to wait for God to send me the help, right? When am I going
Yeah.
to wait for the right person to put me in the right direction and all the things like,
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll start it there, right? I tell, like I said in my last episode, purpose requires action, not perfection. And I think a lot of times we're waiting for the right person, for the right moment, for the right circumstances, and then we're stuck. And we're stuck in analysis paralysis, not doing anything because
Mhm.
we're waiting, right? And if you wait for the perfect timing, for the perfect person, for the perfect situation, you're gonna wait forever. And so sometimes we just gotta go. We just gotta again take the step, even if it's something small, and just trust that God is moving in it and that He's put us in the right place at the right time and that He's with us. And so, okay, if you've put this inside me, I'm walking in faith, right? We say that in scripture all the time. We're walking by faith, not by sight. Faith is believing what is as what you can't see as though you could see it. And so sometimes it just takes a step of faith and saying, okay, I'm putting myself out there. I'm going and seeing. When it comes to when do you become a leader? I think we're all leaders. I think every single person is a leader, even if the only person we're leading is ourselves, right? Because at the end of the day,
so
I'm
good.
in charge of my life. I dictate sure, my boss dictates my 9 to 5 and my family dictates my 5 to 9, but my 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., that's me, right? Whatever time works for you is best. But I'm like, I dictate my time, my values, what I prioritize, I lead myself. And so I tell young people all the time, start with yourself, start leading yourself, start holding yourself accountable, start motivating yourself, and eventually you'll gain more and more influence. I went and grabbed a couple books that related just to that topic. The
That.
first one is The Aspiring Leader's Guide to the Future. Great book. Just talks about, changes in leadership and how we can become better leaders in our here and now, but also in, the days to come. How to Lead When You're Not in Charge is an also phenomenal book to leading yourself, to leading and just taking charge of where you are, what you have, whether it's a small team, whether it's just yourself, your time, right? What's this? Jordan Peterson talks about that all the time. It's like, just
Okay.
own yourself, make your bed, do something that's just for you. And then lastly, the goat, the goat of all times, John C. Maxwell, Developing the Leader Within You, I think is an important book for everybody. So like, okay, I feel this burden and I don't know where to start. These three books I would highly recommend as you're starting to step into this season of leadership and realizing, hey, I gotta lead me first, and then I can express this and share this with others. Now, on the flip side, how do you know when it's time to hand it off? That's a little harder. Some of that comes with time, right? The easy one is retirement. Hey, I've been doing this for X amount of years. I'm getting close to retiring and shifting somewhere else, and so I have to hand it off to a younger leader, somebody who's more in the season of life that they need to be to do this. We see this all the time with CEOs, with pastors. We see that that's a natural handoff is time and age. Another one is when you see responsibility growing, right? I'm thinking through my daughters. Eventually, I'm gonna have to trust them to make right decisions, and they're gonna have to learn to drive and decide things for themselves. And so I won't always be able to hold their hand and walk them, and if I did, they wouldn't learn anything anyways. They'd just be like, well, I'm just doing what dad's telling me to do, and like I want them to learn, I want them to grow, and so I have to let them make decisions and take steps. And so that comes when I've realized, hey, there's maturity there, there's discipline, they're starting to see what it means to make decisions, and so I'm going to hand off some responsibility. Hey, of you're in charge of dinner this week. Something small, right? Hey, mom and dad are just gonna kind of hang out back. We're gonna buy the groceries that you need, and you're in charge of dinner this week, or whatever the case is. I do that with my team. I do that with my staff team. I'm like, hey, here's some projects that we have to do. I trust each and every single one of you to lead them. So you're in charge of this project. Put together the timeline. Put together, like, I'm not doing anything. I'm here to serve you. We're switching roles. You're leading me now, and I'm here to do whatever you need me to do. And so again, that comes with time, with relationship. You got to have a relationship with the people that you're leading. Otherwise, how are you going to know if they're ready? How are you going to know if they're mature enough? How are they going to know if they can handle that burden if you haven't been spending time with them? And I think if I had to narrow it all down, I would say that relational equity supersedes anything. When you've been with the person and when you've walked with them, right? Like we talked about Paul, Silas, and Timothy, they walked together, they lived together, they did life together. And so Paul knew when Timothy was ready. Silas knew when Paul was struggling. Timothy knew that Paul had his best interest in mind. And so I think having that, being again in community, in relationship with one another, that's how you know, okay, this person's ready for me to hand this off and let them take charge. And now I got to find something else, right? Because leaders, you never stop leading. Even if you hand something off, there's something else for you to lead. Whether it's you're going back to square one and now you're leading yourself in a new season of life, or you find that I tend to find myself in situations where there's a gap in leadership, and so I'm like, all right, well, here I am. Let me jump into that, even if that wasn't necessarily the first thing on my mind. But if there's a need, right, we
Right.
serve.
Definitely. I love that you have three books right there. It's like on the ready.
That helps, helps when you try to read 50. At least these were on the second half of my intentionality, and so these I was very intentional about remembering and reading and stuff. So I'm glad that I got the chance to share some. I again highly recommend them. I love reading. I think it would be arrogant of me to say everything that everybody else has learned and put out there, I don't need it, I've got this. I'm like, no, no, I got it. Definitely. Actually, we talked about 4 books this time. That's wild.
Nice. I want to touch on that because you said you used to read a lot with like Harry Potter books, right?
Sure,
And
Narnia, all
then
that stuff.
yeah, and then you even said as you were doing like as many books as possible during the year, you said,
Mhm.
okay, I'm only gonna now read the books that align with my five
Yeah,
F's, right?
yeah.
Foundation or
Focus,
fundamentals,
foundation. Yeah.
focuses.
Awesome.
All the F's.
Yeah.
But so when did you make the decision to shift from entertainment
Hmm.
to, personal development, growth? And because
Yeah,
we all have
that's a great
hobbies,
question.
we all have
Yeah,
things that we
that's a
like to
great question.
do. When do you
Yeah,
see the imbalance? When do you decide to go from like when are you going to read Harry Potter again?
probably never. Yeah,
No,
I
I
think
know.
some of that
But when are you gonna like are you ever going to read actually that's a question. Are you ever gonna read for entertainment again?
just for
And
fun.
why or why
Yeah.
not?
There's a few books that I've kind of had my eye on that I want to read just for just 'cause I'm like, oh, that'd be cool to read.
Leisure.
The Old
Yeah.
Man and the Sea. It's it's just Pride and Prejudice. I read it in high school and I was like, that'd be kind of cool to go back and reread that again. I want to do some like World War II history stuff. I think that'd be very interesting. But I don't know. For me, I think one, the natural shift was age. I hit my late 20s and 30s and I was like, I'm a little old to be reading fantasy novels. So maybe I should stop. Which is not the case.
That
I know grown adults that still read
yeah.
fantasy novels, and I'm like, good for you. But for me, it was just kind of that's that's where I draw the line. Man, I don't know. I
And
think the
let's talk
biggest
about that a little bit. Why?
why do I feel like I'm too old to read fantasy novels?
Yeah.
I think that's a bigger question, but I think for me it's probably the time, right? Reading is a time commitment, and I really want to honor my time and my family's time. And so if I'm like, hey, these are things that I want to do, and of course, I make time for myself and my hobbies and all of that, but I really try to allocate my mornings to things like that, and my late evenings once my girls are asleep. And I've spent some time with my wife, and I've done work and I've done all of that. And so at that point, I'm like, I've given myself an hour to read, consume, do something that's just for me. Right now, I'm in a season of life that I'm like, I want to continue to grow. I want to continue to learn and to make an impact. And so I'm going to focus my consumption on things that help. That don't get me wrong. I was up till 11 o'clock midnight last night watching the new season of Reacher on Amazon Prime because I love that show. And
Okay.
Alan Ritchson is just the man. And so yeah, I'm not saying like I never watch. No, of course I love watching TV. I like to watch a YouTube video when I'm eating dinner. Love Office reruns. Suits is a great show as well. So I definitely make time for that. But usually that time is time that we're doing it. Hey, my wife and I like this show, so we're watching this together, or we're kind of doing that. And so that leisure time for me is separate than development time, and that's kind of just the season of life that I'm in right now. Even with YouTube, right? I do a lot of YouTube videos. I like to watch YouTube videos, whether it's listening to podcasts or sermons, or right now I've been really looking into just fitness things, other fitness guys that they know what they're doing, and kind of learning from them what works, what doesn't work. Because again, I feel like I'm in a season of growth and development, and I want to be better. And so why would I not consume things that make me better, right? Like my diet. There's things that I want to eat. I would love to eat a whole cheesecake and just call it a day, but I got to feed my body, substance. And so I see it the same way. I got to feed my mind and my
Yeah.
soul substance versus,
Yeah.
junk food. And again, every
Your
once in a
mind,
while,
your
like last
body,
night,
and your soul.
yeah, last night I watched Reacher for 3 hours, and so today I probably won't watch any TV just to balance it out.
Yeah. And how do you determine when you're balanced between growth and leisure?
Hmm, that's good. Hopefully, I feel like I'm always, which can be exhausting, but I'm always in growth mode. I'm always
Mhm.
like trying to listen and see, especially if I'm talking to people. I'm like, I'm of the mindset that anybody can teach you anything. And so sometimes people will say something like, man, I hadn't even thought about that. And so now I'm having conversation and learning and stuff. But I think the hardest shifts for me are times, right? My mornings and my evenings. My early mornings and my late evenings are my growth time. So I go to the gym like at 5:30 in the morning. So from 5 in the morning to 8:30, that's my growth time. That's time for go to the gym. That's time to spend in prayer and in my quiet time with the Lord and read my Bible and focus. And then 9 to 5, obviously I'm working, and and thankfully I live. I'm in a profession that I focus on my spiritual growth, and I'm in conversations with people a lot, and I read books that define it. And so there's a little bit of growth happening as I'm working, which is
Mhm.
it's a great spot to be in. And then 5 to 9 is family time. I'm at home and we're having dinner as a family. We're playing with the girls. We're doing bat time. We're going to the park. We're putting them to bed. All of that stuff. And then from 9 to 10:30 ish is kind of my wife and I's time. We got some time to be alone. Now we don't have the girls. We can talk. We can just hang out. Play some video games. We do like to play Mario Party or watch some TV. And then from that 10:30 to 11:30 is wind down time. And so I'm like, okay, if I didn't read today, that's probably when I would do some catch up on my reading. But usually I'm reading in the mornings. Or if I feel like I just didn't grow my 1%, I'm like, what do I gotta do? I gotta watch a quick YouTube. And it's a little obsessive. I will admit that I am a little obsessive about these kind of things. Um, but it's kind of what drives me, and I'm passionate about it, and I'm good at it. And so, right, we're talking about purposes, your
Yeah.
passion and your skill set kind of combining, and that's the season of life I'm in right now.
I'm honestly curious because I find it hard to decide like I won't watch TV.
Yeah,
So, right, but I will go out on a Saturday night and I'll
yeah.
dance. Right? I might dance. Um but yeah, all my books are personal development. I have my audiobooks too
I'll
and
show you. I'll show you a glimpse into my obsessiveness.
oh, I love
It's kind of
obsessive.
my like my
Oh,
weekly
your
time
time blocks?
breakdown. Yeah.
Nice. I
And so
love
I'm like,
that.
okay, morning routine, evening routine, family time, podcast time, community time, work like this. It's just, I
I
think it's important to have balance. You can't
yeah.
just if all you do is consume for growth, eventually you're just gonna burn yourself out. Right. If all you did was eat protein, like your body's gonna be messed up. You need carbs, you need fiber, you need all these other things. And so you need
Yeah.
joy. You need cheesecake from time to
Yeah.
time. It's just a matter of balance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've gotten better, I guess, with that, but I used to just like never have any sugar ever.
Oh
I
no.
think it's so bad for you.
I
And it is,
I'm
but
I'm there right now where I'm like, okay, I'm watching my diet a little bit better, but because prior to the season of life, I didn't. And so I just
right.
consumed things that were just like, oh, junk food is great. I can live off of Dairy Queen all day.
Oh
And now I'm
boy.
paying the price. I'm like, oh, okay, I gotta
Yeah.
trim it up. So I think, man, there's so much wisdom there about being intentional, going back to being intentional with what you
Right.
consume and what you intake. And unfortunately, when you're younger, you don't think about that stuff and you just kind of consume whatever. And then you're just down the road, you've got addictions, you've got mental health problems, you've got physical health problems, all because of decisions that you made when you weren't intentional with what you were doing. And so, again, another big reason for me to be at the 2B Men podcast is saying, hey, guys, watch your health, watch what you're
Yeah.
taking in, watch who you're allowing to speak into your life. Like all of these things, because I've seen it, because I've lived it, and I'm trying to help others avoid doing it as well.
Absolutely. And you brought up the John Maxwell book. John Maxwell has a quote. I might mess it up, but it's something like, if you're not planning, you're correcting.
It's
So
good.
whatever you fail to plan, you then later have to redirect. Like you're later going to have to pay for it. You're either going to plan for something, or if you didn't plan for it, now you have to spend that time correcting what you didn't plan.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's a
It's
quote that we
like,
used to, I think it's Jocko Willink who said it. We used to use it in the army all the time. Life is full of pain. You've got the pain of discipline or you've got the pain of regret.
right.
You
Yeah.
choose which pain you're going to deal with. Deal with
Yeah.
pain of discipline now or
Absolutely.
deal with the pain of regret later.
Yeah. Hey, listen, this has been awesome. I hope, our listeners have so many like nuggets and sound bites to kind of chew on.
Yeah.
Um, it is something I love to talk about. I know it created pain for me when I realized I wasn't being intentional, I wasn't being purpose driven. I mean, on some degree, I guess I was, but not in the way that I was called to. And so I think it might give people something to think about, something to reflect on, something to, pay attention to. And then the last step is just to like step into courage to do the difficult things
Yeah.
and do the things that, we take to feel like impossible, but
Hmm.
when we follow that call, and take those imperfect steps, and like you said, it's really progress over the perfection, and just
Yeah.
take them in faith. That courage will lead you to such a beautiful place. And so I honor this time. I love this topic. I would love to have you back on at some point too.
Yeah. It'd be great. I'd
Um,
love to.
yeah. And we'll see everybody next time
All
then.
right. See you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Courage and Purpose. I hope today's insights inspired you to take bold action and align your life and career with what truly matters to you. If you're ready to dive deeper, I invite you to download my free Action Indicator Assessment, a powerful tool to help you uncover what's holding you back and take the next step towards clarity and confidence. Just visit www.lifeonpurpose.coach/action indicator to get started today. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who could use a little extra courage on their journey. Until next time, stay true to your purpose, lead with courage, and keep thriving. I'll see you in the next episode.